As a note, this video will have no major story spoilers for Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and I will issue a warning before giving any major spoilers around how the game is structured, or what sort of new content is in the game. However, during the gameplay, you will see footage from several planets and enemies which have not been included in the marketing material. So if you want to go in completely spoiler-free, don't watch this video. With that being said, roll the intro. Star Wars Jedi Survivor comes out in a few days, and I was lucky enough to get a review code. My main goal for this video is to answer two questions. One, should you buy the game? And two, is it better than Jedi Fallen Order? Before we begin, however, I do have a very special announcement. Today is day one of Star Wars A Jedi's Legacy. This is a creator-led charity initiative that I will be running in partnership with Cure Rare Diseases. Cure Rare Diseases has a really beautiful story. It was started by a man named Rich who wanted nothing more than to save his little brother Terry from muscular dystrophy. Unfortunately, Terry died last October, but as a huge Star Wars fan, what better way is there to recognize the fact that he upheld the virtues of a Jedi, courage, selflessness, and hope, than to donate to Cure Rare Diseases, which right now has 19 active drug development program for a variety of neuromuscular diseases, including the disease which took Terry's life. I've started a YouTube fundraiser. You can see it right now on the side of the screen, and we've also got a ton of prizes that I can give away if we'd reach certain fundraising goals, up to a PlayStation 5 if we get to 20k, which we will, because I'm not stopping until we get there, and more. So consider donating. It's for an amazing cause. But let's get on with the video. Let's talk about Star Wars Jedi Survivor. As I mentioned in my preview of the game, Jedi Survivor has the incredible advantage of building off an already phenomenal product. Jedi Fallen Order is one of the best Star Wars games ever, and the real quality of its foundations really carries Jedi Survivor to a certain level. But does it surpass the original game? That was one of the two questions I posited in the intro. The other was, should you pre-order? And that's where I've got to start off with some difficult news, because unfortunately I have to start this video with a warning. This game did not play well for me. I'm a PC player. I have a very powerful computer, a 3080 Ti graphics card, a top-line CPU, and there were almost no periods in this game where I got a stable above 50 FPS. I often had drops all the way down to 15. The cutscenes were completely broken for me. It was just an overall really unfortunate experience. Now, there is some good news. As I was playing, it seems like they dropped several pre-launch patches, and there's supposed to be a patch day 0 that fixes these issues, and probably there will be a driver update as well. I hope that fixes the issues, but my experience was seriously hurt by performance. Again, cutscenes were totally broken, audio wasn't working. The game was still playable for most points and still even ran well during certain sections, but really detracted from my experience. If you are going to pre-order, make sure that the platform you play on has a refund option. I have also heard, thankfully, that this issue does not extend to consoles, and it also seems to be unique to high-end NVIDIA GPUs, but there was nothing I could do to fix it. I could play on Ultra with ray tracing on, or Medium with all effects off, still had the issues. That's not great. Hopefully you never experienced that, but I've got to report on what I played, not what you will hopefully play when the game launches. But let's dive into what the game actually is, and you probably know the basics of this series already. It's a mix on Metroidvania, Dark Souls, and The Force Unleashed. And I'll explain those each in part briefly. Metroidvania, because as the game progresses, you get new skills and powers which allow you to explore previously inaccessible areas. This game does the right move, I think, in basically starting you off where you were at the end of Jedi Fallen Order, but you do pick up new abilities along the way, including my favorite, a dash, which makes horizontal traversal a little more interesting. And on that note, the platforming in this game was generally a lot more difficult and probably more interesting than it has been in the past. The Dark Souls aspect can obviously be seen in Survivor's version of campfires, the respawning enemies, and the general difficulty. Although I will say, playing this game on Jedi Knight, it felt significantly less difficult than Fallen Order. I don't think there was a boss I lost to more than 3 times. However, I'll fully acknowledge that since playing Fallen Order for the first time, I beat the game on Grandmaster, and I did the Dark Souls trilogy. The Force Unleashed aspect is obvious. You're a Jedi who uses his Force powers and his lightsabers to take down enemies. And this game, I would say more than any other, leaned into the ridiculous powers that a Jedi can have. The first game was smart, I think, for starting you off very weak. Like, a single stormtrooper can pose a serious threat to your progression, especially if you're not familiar with the combat style. You're never really at that point in this game. It kind of throws you in right off the deep end. And the spectacle in this one is also much larger. As you play through the game, you're fighting larger hordes of enemies, doing crazier things in boss fights, and your powers grow to what I would call fairly surprising levels. One of the big differences in this game is the introduction of new stances. Alongside the single and double lightsaber, as we saw in Jedi Fallen Order, Survivor also offers a heavy lightsaber, a dual-handed lightsaber, and also a pistol and lightsaber combo where the lightsaber is almost used like a fencing saber. Now for me, throughout the entire game, I used double lightsaber with the heavy saber. You get to choose 2 stances, no more. In my opinion, the High Republic Claymore is probably the most fun way to play the game. It makes boss fights really interesting. You take off large chunks of their health, but you're also more likely to get punished with long wind-up animations if you get greedy. On the other hand, something like the dual-handed lightsaber actually has animation canceling, so you can be much more exacting with how you dole out damage if you so choose. I really like these stances, but I would have liked to see even more in terms of fundamental gameplay improvements. For example, I think jumping in combat has been really underused in this series, and it would have been nice to have that brought in as a significant way to vary combat rather than just adding 1 or 2 alternate attacks. I also would have preferred if the pistol had been an add-on to all stances rather than just being a stance all on its own, because I didn't feel like there were that many cases where the extra range really justified going down to that single, almost fencing style of saber attacks. There are also several mounts in the game, but to be honest, they don't significantly change gameplay. They're mostly used to traverse during the open world sections, but I never really felt like they were used fully to their potential. They're usually just a part of a linear open world section. I mean, they're always there, but usually you'll just be teleporting through the meditation zones anyway, or as a part of a puzzle where I did feel like they were maybe a bit more interesting. Another big change in gameplay that I talked about in the preview video I did was customization. Everything from his hair and his facial hair to his clothing to his lightsaber. There were some really nice details here. For example, when you get the new High Republic edition to your lightsaber, you can change how the vents are angled, you can change the look of the vents themselves. There's a ton you can unlock for your lightsaber, a lot of which you get through doing side missions or really exploring. But I gotta now move from the fundamental aspects of the game, which I think are well understood, to the actual content. So if you want to go in completely fresh, now might be a time to click away. I'm going to be talking about enemy variety, planets, although I won't give specifics, and more. It's really hard for me to determine what the response to Jedi Survivor is going to be like, because while the game takes some major steps forward, for me, there were just some disappointments. The game didn't add enough that was new. You spend a lot of the game fighting against this new pirate gang, the Bedlam Raiders. You'll see them using CIS battle droids. There are some really cool variations there, and the Empire. Unfortunately, the Empire hasn't changed a whole lot from Jedi Fallen Order. In fact, most of the fights feel pretty much identical, which I thought was a bit of a disappointment. There's also mini bosses, native fauna, of course, mini quest specific enemies, but at least while you're progressing down the golden path, a lot of what you're facing gets a little bit stale, I would say. I wanted the game to offer more variety, and that is my single biggest complaint. The format of this game is changed significantly from Jedi Fallen Order. And again, I am going to be talking about the structure of the game, so if you want to go in fully blind, you might want to click away here. So in Jedi Survivor, rather than there being a variety of larger worlds, there's one really large world, Kobo, then several smaller worlds, including Jeddah. Now, these worlds I thought are generally done pretty well. Jeddah especially is great. The problem is you're spending the story going back and forth between Kobo and one other world in particular, which I'm not going to spoil, and the second one in particular is pretty disappointing. It's essentially just a facility. So it's like you go to Kobo, you go to Jeddah, you go to this other world, and you're essentially just mixing that back and forth for what feels like a lot of the game. And I found that extremely frustrating. I wanted to visit the galaxy, go to other places, but this story is much smaller and more contained than Fallen Order. Now, to be fair, Kobo is the largest planet that's been in any of these games, and it may be larger than any 3 3 Jedi Fallen Order planets put together. The problem is, you're spending so much of your time there, and it just gets repetitive. Yeah, the planet can look significantly different depending on where you were, and I really appreciated that, but it's not the same as going to Ilum, then flying to Dathomir, or choosing whether you want to go to Dathomir or Kashyyyk first. I really missed that openness that the first game had. This game puts you on a much clearer progression, I guess. The benefit is that this is a long game. Like, I probably came in at about 20 hours or so, and I did the story mainly. I did a few side things, but I had limited time. NHL playoffs are on, baby. I pretty much went through the story, especially once I reached the halfway point. I just went main objective to main objective. Kobo really opens up the more you do. You're always getting new messages about new side quests and whatever else. Some of these seem to be pretty expansive, others not so much. Go somewhere, find a thing, kill an enemy, whatever. And you're generally getting new lightsaber hilts or new appearances, sometimes new perks, which is a completely new system I don't really have time to talk about, or an upgrade to your force abilities, whatever. Some of these contain unique bosses, like I mentioned the Rancor, that's hidden on Kobo. Other times, you're just fighting the normal enemies. The disappointing thing is, it's really only Kobo and Jedha which offer any opportunity for exploration. The other planets in the game, you'll pretty much get to 80 to 100% completion just by doing the main story. In a way, it feels sort of appropriate for a second entry in the series like this, but I also felt disappointed to be losing out on the more interesting exploration that the first game offered. It is impressive that the game is so long while removing the backtracking that at times bogged down Jedi's Fallen Order, but they somewhat undo that a bit by having you revisit the same planets over and over again. I don't want to harp on this point because I want to make it clear that I still had a ton of fun while playing the game, and I was really interested to see where the story would go next, but I definitely felt myself wanting to be somewhere else at times. I will say, I do really love the Cantina system they have. Grease has his Cantina. You can go there and customize things like the music that's playing. You can fill out this entire garden on the rooftop, which I thought was cool. There are bounty hunting missions you can get in there. The Cantina itself has a really cool, cozy vibe, and you sort of collect characters from around the galaxy the more you play. So I really liked all of that. I gotta say, that part was great. I also thought linear sections throughout the game were good. The game starts you out on Coruscant. Again, not much to explore there, but I liked the planet. The beginning of Jedha was great. Maybe my favorite segment in either of these two games so far. And one thing I didn't really mention is that you do progressively feel stronger as you play through the game. Cal's abilities improve, as do yours. That's always the case with these Souls-like games. I thought it served the narrative pretty well. I'll talk briefly about boss fights. The Inquisitorius is definitely less present in this game, and I thought that was a bit of a mistake, honestly. It definitely felt like there were less major bosses for you to fight, and that also, I feel, hurt the enemy variety. Like in Jedi Fallen Order, there are segments where you're just fighting the Zepho, or the Dathomir Night Sisters / brothers. That's a little bit of variety that this game could have used. I feel like I'm starting to repeat myself, so I will talk very briefly about the story. Of course, no major spoilers here, but I'll also say, at this point, you probably know how I feel about the game, so if you want to go in completely open, just click away at this point. So I was actually surprised by how deeply this game was tied to the High Republic, and as someone who's not super into that era, it didn't really bother me that I wasn't like an expert or wasn't super otherwise interested in the High Republic. Sort of a basic amount of knowledge, i.e. that the Republic was a little different before the Clone Wars, is pretty much enough. The new characters are all pretty compelling. I found myself wishing that we got to spend more time with all of them, really. Cal spends quite a bit of time alone, but wanting to spend more time with characters is a good thing, but there's also the point where I just want to know more about their motivations. I want to have a check-in because I haven't seen them for, 10 hours of game time. The return of Marin, Grease, and Seer was all excellent as well. I liked how those characters were handled, and really I thought the story as a whole, although very different than Jedi Fallen Order, was still good and was still compelling. There were, I think, some issues with pacing, as you can probably tell from throughout my review, especially in how the last, say, 20% plays out, but the franchise has definitely been taken into a compelling place. I like how they handle the characters and how they handle their different motivations. Cal is almost self-destructive in how he's throwing himself into the fight non-stop. You definitely do not need to read the tie-in novel. There's nothing from it that impacts the game, thankfully. And the game actually ends in a very interesting place, one I didn't think they would go to. It definitely makes me think we're going to get a third and perhaps final entry in the series, although I wouldn't be surprised if they extended it to 4 or even more. There are definitely some bold choices, and in general, I was behind mind all of them. There was one surprise about midway through that I thought was very cool. I could tell you more, I'm just choosing not to. There are parts of this game that feel more like The Force Unleashed than Jedi Fallen Order, but I generally thought that was okay and fit within the scope of the video game. Also, there's a ton of lore, lots of cool codex entries. I feel like if you explore this game, you'll get a lot out of it. And I think those are my general thoughts on Jedi Survivor. Obviously, some bad, but still a lot of good. Should you pre-order this game? If you enjoyed Jedi Fallen Order, yes, you should. However, as I mentioned, make sure you're pre-ordering somewhere that has good return policies. Hopefully you don't experience technical issues if you're on console especially. I suspect you won't, but I did. Is this game better than Jedi Fallen Order? I don't know. When it comes to like the fundamental aspects of the gameplay, yeah, the combat is better, it's more fun, there are more options, the customization, all of that, pretty serious improvement. I think I liked the structure of this game less than Fallen Order. When it comes to story, I can't quite say. To me, Fallen Order was way too dependent on a plot device I never really felt was fully explained. In this game, pretty much right away, you know what the end goal is and who you're facing off against. It's just the lack of diversity in locations sort of hurts it a bit for me. With that being said, as I was recording this review, I put out an ask for questions that you guys might have, so I'm going to take a few seconds now to answer those. Will it teach me to be a better lover? Physical, emotional? Almost certainly. Kevin asked, does this have any tie-ins or setups for the movies or shows? And it sort of did have some Kenobi tie-ins, which I thought was cool. How is the blaster gameplay? I've heard it's a bit janky. I'd say some of the animations are a bit janky, but it plays pretty well. Someone asked about difficulty and challenge. I think it's pretty similar. I just think I'm maybe a bit better at the game. Jedi Grandmaster, which I'm probably going to play for my stream tomorrow, that should be a really difficult challenge. Someone asked about puzzles, and there's no main stories Sevo section really, although I understand that there are challenge temples hidden throughout the world. Another question that I think is really relevant, if you haven't played the first game and you aren't that into the whole puzzle / exploration and power-ups, do you think it's worth buying? Yeah, I would say you can go into this game pretty fresh, although you'll really be missing out on the character interactions. There is a story you can watch at the beginning, a little cutscene. The puzzles can be as difficult as you want it to be. The mini-map is a cheat code in this game. It always tells you basically, oh, I can go through here, I can't go through here. There are also accessibility settings to help with everything from making the puzzles or navigation easier, to slowing time down during combat, which is a pretty cool option, to even negating things like fall damage if you struggle with some of the navigational or parkour sections. But this review is getting long, and I think I've pretty much spelt out all my thoughts. If you guys want a follow-up video answering your questions, I'd be happy to put that out. But until next time, have a good one. May the Force be with you. Donate to that gosh dang charity, and I'll see you soon.